If we were to look at a hypothetical situation, let's say an opportunity came across your desk to buy territories for a new brand that's getting started or expanding. How would you first evaluate that, and how would your process look in order to decide whether or not it's a good fit for you?
So we'll go back to the first thing. I'm not excited about it unless I can visualize the ideal customer and the ideal employee. Okay, so now I understand what I need to do to be successful. Okay, so let's define what successful is. So I'm looking for two things. I'm looking for the ROI on my initial investment. For me, sweet spot's 36 months. I'm not going to turn away a deal if it's 40 months, but I'm going to get more excited about 24 months, right? Okay, so once I figured that one out, and I've always had that one, always. But over the last couple of years, I've evolved and I've looked at, I don't care about the top performers or the bottom performers. I just want to know average, right? The average sales and the average multiples. When I want to get out of the business, will I make more money selling it than what it costs to open it? And I can tell you, I've gotten into businesses where I spent more money building it than what I was able to sell it for, or other people have. But you made so much money over the 10 years of owning it, it was a good investment, right? But now that I have opportunities to pick and choose what investments, I want to know that the exit strategy is making me money as well as just the holding on to the asset does.
So if you were to find those numbers, first of all, how are you finding them? But then second of all, how are you verifying that they're accurate? Like, for example, and I'm not in your world, but if a franchisor were to provide you with numbers on, hey, these are the average sales per store, do you take that for what it is, or do you do your own due diligence?
You got to do both. So what's great about franchising is, and not all franchisors do it, but the ones that you want to take serious do. It's called an Item 19. There's lots of items in the franchise disclosure document. But the Item 19 is a third-party verified, certified financial statement. Okay. And they're not all created equal. And I'll give you an example. Okay. So many, many years ago, we were looking at the Jimmy John's brand, and their Item 19 is very strong. And we were really excited about it. But at that time, it was about $100 more or $100,000 more to open up a Jimmy John's and a Little Caesars. And we were still at the point where we were growing Little Caesars. When you started looking, and it was very clear, it said, these are our corporate locations, okay? So when you started talking to the franchisees, I said, hey, does your numbers look like the Item 19? They're like, not for most of my stores. And it wasn't because the brand was being dishonest. It was that the corporate stores were all in markets that had a third meal, which was late night. So they had their lunch, they had their dinner, which is what you're going to have in suburbia. But on college campuses, where they were all, you get the bar rush and the late night, right? So they just had more revenue per square foot, as an example, than the chain did as a whole. Now, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't have exactly the same type of numbers if I only opened up in those same type of spots, right? But we weren't going to do that. We were going to open up in suburbia where we could open a lot of them and manage them. So we skipped on that one. Not because I thought it was a terrible investment. It's just it cost $100,000 more. At the end of the day, it was making about the same money as a Little Caesars. So why not just open another Little Caesars? So we didn't have to learn a new brand. So we did. We opened another Little Caesars just because of that. But so the Item 19 is something that you can really look at and determine that. Now, the other side is that trust but verify, right? So that's what we did. So I got on LinkedIn, started looking up people that were franchisees of whatever brand. We start calling. It's like, hey, what's your experience been? Most people will respond, and they're going to be very honest with you. And you have to take the good with the bad. Like, there's always something not perfect in any relationship. So just keep that in mind when you're doing your interviews and your due diligence, that there's going to be rough patches where, the franchisor was learning how to handle something and it just didn't get done, or it affected that particular franchisee more negatively than it did the brand or the system. So just always kind of take everything in a grain of salt. But when you're dealing with these franchisees, they're going to have different perspectives. So just ask them, what would you do it again? Is the number one question. Would you do this again? And if they say no, and you hear it overwhelmingly, maybe a brand you want to stay away from. If you're like, heck yeah, double down, I'm opening more locations, then it's probably a brand you want to look at a little bit deeper.
That makes a lot of sense. So what about if you were looking at a brand like, I'm sure you've heard of Crumble Cookies.
Yeah.
a year or two ago, I would imagine if you called folks and looked at the numbers, they looked great. But I've heard or read that they're not doing so well now, or the trajectory doesn't look the same.
Yeah.
Is that just a matter of luck, or is that just your gut instinct because you've been in the business for so long, or is that something that someone can foresee one way or another?
Well, I actually have close friends that are Crumble cookie franchisees, and they seem to be doing very well with it. So I think it's a case-by-case situation. But I will tell you that, and I kind of follow everything in franchising, and from what I can see from a third-party perspective is, and I just know this, if you keep opening locations that are too close to another existing Crumble, like my biggest competitor in Sport Clips is another Sport Clips, not a Supercuts, not a Great Clips. Yes, they're competitors, but our customers don't look identical to each other, but they look identical for the same brand, right? So, as an example with Crumble, if there was only one Crumble in St. Louis, people would drive a little further just to get the Crumble experience, not as frequent. So that's where the trade-off is. You open more locations because you want the frequency to go up. So I think in certain markets, that's been around a little bit longer. They've built out more. They've had franchisees get more aggressive and build out more, and that's going to just dilute the market share. So I think that might be a part of it. I mean, at some point, you have a break even in a business, and then you make way more money as a percentage the higher your sales go, right? You don't, like, if you double your sales, you don't just double the profit. You actually probably triple it, because you have things like your overhead, like your manager's salary. You have your rent and your insurance that are the same, whether you're doing $1 million a year or $3 million a year in cookies, as an example. So I think that that might have been it. I think maybe the newness of the brand in some markets. So like my friends, they're opening at new locations, right? So it's still hot. And I can tell you from my Little Caesars, our first year open was always our biggest sales year open. It could take decades before you got back to those sales, because for whatever reason, someone wants to eat your pizza 3 times a week for the first month, and then they get maybe once a month after that, right? It has nothing to do with the quality of the product or the brand or the operations. It's just the flavor comes in and goes. So yeah, talk to your franchisees. In that particular case, I would talk to people that have been in the business for 4 years, because I think Crumble's been around 5-6 years. Talk to the franchisees who've been around 4 years. Are they still really happy with it? And talk to the people just opened up a year ago. Say, are you happy a year later? Would you do this? And I think if the answer is yes to both, you should do the brand.